Welcome to Portal Talks, Episode 8, with your host, me, Kyle Waugh. Today on the show, we've got a special guest, Matthew Uohara. He's a strength and conditioning specialist based out of Los Angeles, California, where during the off seasons, he's helping out and training a lot of Olympians, NFL, MLB players, really just high-level athletes. So it's great to just, and a true pleasure to have him on the show and be able to pick his brain in terms of language, epigenetics, and what really sets these athletes apart, as well as his own training models. So, as always, the show is brought to you by Wall Personal Training, where I will help you with anything posture related, anything rehab, fitness, whatever it is, I got your back. So check out the site, wallpersonaltraining.com. And without further ado, let's get into the show. All right. Excellent. And we're rolling. All right. So let's just kind of jump into it. Do you prefer Matt or Matthew?
Either or, whatever rolls off your tongue better.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'll call you, we're friends now, I guess. I'll call you Matt.
Perfect.
And then how do you pronounce your last name? I'm going to butcher it, I feel.
So the true Japanese way of saying it is Uohara, but a lot of people kind of blend it with an Irish pronunciation.
Yeah.
So it's like O'Hara, but any way that you want. Uohara seems to be the easiest.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm going to butcher that, Matt.
It means field of fish.
Gotcha. Well, hey, my last name, Waugh, means foreigner. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm like, well, I don't really know who came up with that one, but
yeah,
someone down, back there just did not like us, I guess. But all right, so we have Matt Uohara.
Yes.
As best as I can do. On the show today, Portal Talks. Yeah, man, I've been following you for quite a while, and just your content. I actually found it through when I really got introduced to PRI-based principles and just like watching your moves. And I feel like you have a great blend of different styles and how your posts are very nicely put together, and the way you move is just excellent. And it's crazy to me how, I don't know, it's an interesting, I'm super happy to have you on the show and just kind of talk to you and see like what your perspectives are with everything and training and even rehab. So we'll just kind of jump into it. And who are you and what do you do, man?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. My name is Matthew Uohara, like you said. I'm a strength and conditioning coach here out in Los Angeles. And primarily I work with athletes during their off season. So like once the season's finished, they'll take a couple of weeks off or so, and then they come in and see me, and I'll take them all the way up until training camp, which this year's been a little interesting. We've had a little bit longer off season than we'd like to have had, but I'll do it for all sports, but primarily I dropped football recently, so I'll do it primarily for baseball, basketball, and hockey. And then every 4 years or so, we'll do some of the Olympians too.
Gotcha. So you are more of the professional level, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I have very few people that aren't training for some sort of event or competition.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the pinnacle of like where I feel a lot of strength and conditioning specialists want to be at.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I'm sure especially coming from, it's always fun when you get an athlete and they're just like ready to go and work hard and they are at that like higher level. And I've had the opportunity to train a couple and also take them through a rehab process, and it can be very rewarding. And it's just a whole nother, it's almost intimidating at times, especially like just starting out. You're like, man, this guy's an animal. Like,
the stakes are high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess when we're talking about, you're at this like higher level, what sort of, we already mentioned PRI, but do you have any other methods or things that you study that you apply with this population?
Yeah, I've studied DNS as well. As far as like, training systems go, I've studied DNS, PRI. I've done some stuff with FRC as well. So I have those. And then personally, I have both a martial arts background. I have recently kind of delved into doing some more like calisthenic type of stuff. So a lot, I just like it because the arm balances are fun. But then you always take these kind of little nuggets of information and you can see where you can apply them in your business. And then I used to play basketball in high school, and I did it at IMG Academy. So it was nice. It was a pretty high level of competition, and I got to learn a little bit at a young age about how pros kind of conduct themselves. And I think it set me up really, really well for what I'm dealing with now. And so yeah, those I take all of that information and then I try and blend them into one philosophy. And I really, some methods are better at certain times than others. And so you get to basically bias it any way you like, especially if you're running your own business.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it's, I've had the opportunity to hang out with some pretty smart guys, and they're looking at it the same way. It's just like, hey, you have these different principles and you have this background, but it's really meeting the person where they are and being able to give them what they need at that point in time. And then
Yeah.
also build it out for the long term. What's right for them right now may not be right for them down the road, and it's going to have to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this is kind of like a little bit out there, but to be honest, my father was probably one of my biggest training influences that I've ever had. He was an OBGYN. He is retired now, but during his OBGYN practice, he also trained a lot of dogs. And he would bring these Rottweilers in from all over the world, and he would train them in Schutzen, which is the police style of like bite training. He would do drug tracking as well. And so when I was around that as a young kid, I learned a lot about how to kind of conduct my body and how to carry myself, because that's your area of communication with your dog. It's very little verbal, and it's much more of this body language and tone of voice rather than what you're saying. And so it was really, really helpful to have that at such a young age. And so I think he's actually probably my biggest influence in my training style that I have today.
Yeah, because that's such a huge factor. I know when I'm training someone, I can relay a message without even saying anything, just by changing, like my arm positioning or standing closer or further away from them.
Yep.
And I have a dog as well, and just kind of training him was an interesting process as well. It's like the words you say don't even matter.
Yeah.
They have no idea what you're saying. And I learned actually quite a bit just in my little experience. I'm not an expert, dog trainer by any means, but even just that, it was a different mindset and like thought process. And
Yeah.
that even like brings up, I've even thought about how different cultures who have different languages, just different styles of communication, could even be nonverbal. And if you took that person and you gave them this all, like say PRI principles, like how they could apply it, or even, because I know PRI, they have a pretty large following in Japan, correct?
Yes, you're right.
It'd be interesting to like, I don't know Japanese, but how that information is relayed, and if you could have better outcomes with a different language or
Yeah, it is.
communication.
I have had some experience with people that speak Spanish and no English. I've had experience with people that speak very little English and Japanese actually. I've had experience with kids too that necessarily wouldn't get all of the information that you're throwing at them as well. So that is very much so where you rely on body language. you rely on showing a lot, and you have to be a good mover yourself because you're their best example and what they're attempting to mimic. And they can go through those patterns within their head before they ever try them themselves. And if you're a good example there, then it builds this bridge in which you can kind of communicate.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's kind
And
of,
then touch too, right?
yeah, that's a huge one as well. And I've had experience, especially with Spanish speaking populations, and it's all nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
And, we try to have fun, but it's touch, feel this, X, Y, and Z. And like you said, just showing. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's interesting because really training, that's really all it is it's just forms of communication, in my opinion.
You're right. There are all
And
these different iterations, right?
exactly. And the better you're able to, and that's even, I've talked to some other folks, and it's interesting to think about. There's all kinds of different definitions for the same thing we're seeing, even like a left AIC pattern. There's other like Z health. I'm sure DNS, they talk about them in like stress patterns.
Yeah.
It would
And I
be,
think Michael Mullen actually does a really good job of that. He sometimes makes some posts online where he'll say, well, I could say it this way, or I could say it this way, or I could say it this way. And I really appreciate that because I think that in a world of everybody trying to be so specific and sell their product, it's nice to have those few people out there that do exactly what Michael Mullen does and shows how they're all saying the same thing, guys. There's nothing special about it, but what is special are these principles,
mhm,
and here's how we can move forward.
exactly. And I think that's where you can definitely tell the difference between a good trainer and a great trainer, or a good therapist and a great therapist, is they're basing everything off of principles versus just completely buying into a method.
Hmm.
But, and I guess that kind of goes into the next question. I mean, you were talking about how these different, well, let's backtrack because I still want to stay on the language piece because I think that's super interesting. Um, do you think we would be more, as an industry, it would be more beneficial if we took all these definitions and we just labeled it as one primary thing and we had a word for it? Or do you think that would be better for training in the general population as a whole? Or do you think it's better to have more options and different ways to explain it, as a stress pattern, as a left AIC, or a PEC and an anterior tilt of a pelvis?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that a lot, and I agree with you. I think that yes, we would benefit not only as a field, but we would benefit the public that we are attempting to communicate with. That everybody's saying the same thing and agreeing upon terms, and then you can get a little bit more artistic with your explanations. But I think at the baseline level, everybody has to agree upon what terms mean. And so I've been doing a lot of writing and over the last 8, 9 years now, and I still haven't put out any of it. But a lot of it is going on. The point that you brought up is how do I create a language in which we can all start from first principles and work our way forward and logically proceed down this path here. And now I can bring up a term called acceleration, or I can bring up a term called gravity, and we all agree upon what those things mean, as opposed to just your subjective take on it. And then you go to another system and they have another subjective take on it. So I have been working on that for a very long time, and I know I'll take a lot longer still, but I 100% agree with you. I think that our industry as a whole will improve if we could do that. And then I think the people that we are attempting to help will benefit as a symptom as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I've thought it as well. Thinking we should become more, it's the same thing as strength and conditioning principles. I wish a lot of this, and I assume it just takes time, And as an industry, we probably need to get out of our own way
Yep.
in a lot of that. But it does seem to, even as I've gone through mentorships, it's almost as though we're telling people, yes, you want these principles, but you're even developing your own methodologies in some way and what makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
It could go either direction. I think, like you're saying, we should have that streamlined language
Mm-hmm.
and everyone should apply it. But I do think that, I have Susan and Lucy over here, and I explain a principle one way, and Susan gets it right off the bat, but Lucy's over here right over her head.
Yep.
And I do think, I guess that does go along with what you're saying. We just need to establish a baseline language
Yeah,
across
you
the
have a
board.
blueprint, and then you can have your artistic freedom because some people will understand what you're trying to say in terms of music. Some people understand it in terms of uh, biomechanics, and that's what I think you're getting at.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. And kind of the model that I've been working through in my head is starting at the beginning. So I want to start with physics and I want to establish those terms first. And then I want to work my way into chemistry and then work my way into biology and then work your ways into evolution. And then we start talking about human movement later on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you can work your way through that, logically, there are no missteps. And then every single point along the way, you are following terms that meant something at a very, very deep level to begin with. And all the steps that follow are reliant upon that term meaning that definition. Because that definition is very important.
Definitely. It sounds very similar. Have you ever listened to, or listen, I always listen to books on Audible. Have you ever read, I'm still making my way through it. I'm trying to look up the title right now. Cosmo Sapiens.
No, I haven't.
I think
Is
you
it good?
really, it's good. It's very dense, but it goes through, it literally starts with the Big Bang
Yeah, and I agree.
and it goes all the way through, and it's diving into physics and just establishing principles of how the universe works
Hmm.
as we know it. And then it starts, so vast and so huge, and then it just starts getting narrowed down to the point of evolution and talking about biology, and then creation of life on Earth, or Earth first, then life on Earth. And then it's, as I'm getting through it, like I said, it's a really big book. And then it starts to talk about humans as a species, and then how
Yeah.
we developed and where we come from, and then gets into language. And it's just like meta analysis on every single topic, getting toward where we are today.
Yep. That's exactly what we need as a field.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about terms that we don't necessarily know the definition of, and we're throwing around these sayings and these phrases, but we, as the speakerphone or as the producers, as the source of that information, we don't really understand what we're saying. So I think as a whole, this whole field needs to take a big, gigantic step back and understand the very basics first. And then we can start to agree upon how to move forward. Because that's what all the other sciences do to begin with. Um, all other sciences, if we're looking at physics, biology, all these other very deep sciences, they have a lot of disagreements and arguments about how to describe certain events in the world. And they're not because they're trying to, well, some are, but for the most part, it's not to establish their point of view. It's so that they can come to an agreement about how to um, understand what is really going on out there. And I think us dealing with humans and thinking we can, because as you know, any kind of stimulus that we give the body will create change. And change isn't that, how am I going to say this? it's not that fascinating, meaning that you're not that special if we can create change in the body, but creating change in a desired path and going through very methodical steps to reach point B from point A, that's hard to do. And all those other sciences out there, they have used the scientific method as a means to come to terms about how to move forward. But for us, when we deal with humans, we have so much freedom because the body contains so much complexity that we can create change and think we're doing great things. But it's just because you provided a different stimulus. It isn't necessarily that your method was sound and logical all the way through. And I do 100% think that we need to figure out a way to come together and achieve that, which is why I have gravitated so much to things like PRI, because I do think that they are attempting to create objective testing, objective languages. And although it may seem complex when you enter into it, I think it has to be, because you're trying to describe complex systems and very integrated systems that all are reliant on one another.
Mm-hmm. It's 2 points. One, I'll paraphrase, but Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about a similar thing, and that you're describing with all the other sciences and what they've done is our theories and our research and our evidence that we find should bring us closer together to find a point of, this is true, this is what's happening. Whereas I think fitness falls victim to marketing and people just trying to make a living.
Yep.
And that people want to prove their point so much that it's done nothing but dilute the industry.
Yeah, we don't have a high enough bar to get into our system.
Right.
Yep.
And you're honestly the first person I've heard say sciences, and when referring to fitness, and I would even say rehabilitation and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, it's its own whole field. I mean, you look at the medical field and they do the same thing like you're describing, which is coming together and saying what's best for the patient and all this stuff. I think it would be nice if we saw that, but again, we have to step out of our own way. And I think establishing credibility goes a long way as well, that the people truly doing good things need to have a bigger voice.
Yep.
But it's still a wild west with rehab and fitness, in my opinion. We only haven't got our shit together since the past 20 years.
Yeah.
From what I can tell. So it's interesting where things are going.
Yeah, my father was my father's so funny. Like, for being Asian, you would think that we're all up on the latest technology and stuff, but he's a little behind. Like, he just learned how to text about a year ago.
Oh man.
But he's so funny. He brought up this to me the other day. He's like, Matt, have you ever heard of this term called FOMO? He's like, it's fear of missing out, right? And I think that's what our field really suffers from, is that we have this fear of missing out on the latest trend, of capitalizing financially on the latest gadget or movement or system, and we jump so quickly rather than sit back and wait a little bit and think through the process and say, okay, is this really the right direction for me to go on? We don't have great enough radar detectors, and I think that only comes from doing some more personal work. You have to really do some good homework on your own, and then it gives you these great sensors about where to go and what to read and how to alert yourself. Actually, I was reading, one of my favorite books is called Map and Territory, and it's by this guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And he has this great kind of line in there, where he says your power as a rationalist is your ability to be confused by fiction more than reality. And it's brilliant because if you really work yourself through as far as the scientific method and you really do your own homework on your own, what should happen is you're going to create this working model in your head, right? And you're moving forward through your entire life with this model. And the model's dynamic and it evolves. But the things that alert you are not the things that you would predict. They're the things that are unpredictable that sit out of the common, your working model. So if I'm going into Africa and I see this, orange elephant, and I've always learned that elephants, and I had this working model in my head that elephants were gray. There are two options. One, I can choose to believe that, well, maybe there are orange elephants out there, and they're much more common than I thought because I see one right there. And maybe the way that they adapt is that they have this different relationship with the sun, for example. And I can make all these fantastical things up in my head. Or I could say, no, that sits outside of my model, and I am alerted to it because it seems like fiction to me. So knowing what I know, how can I now look at this orange elephant and determine whether it truly is orange, or maybe it's just a little dusty, or you go through this model, and what will happen is that if you can approach it in that way, that whatever information you come up with, whether you truly find out that there are orange elephants, or you find out that, well, it was just a dirty elephant, it's going to update your model moving forward. And now your model's more powerful. And I think we in our industry don't do enough of that. We see orange elephants and we believe there's orange elephants, and we tell ourselves these fantastical stories in our head so that we don't have to update our model, so that now orange elephants are part of the model. And yeah, I can put a crystal on your head and it makes this test do that, like that, all those things. So that's where I think that we need to do our better work is create these, in his words, maps that better represent reality. The map isn't reality. The model isn't reality. But if we can continuously update it and make it closer and closer to the truth, then we can, by the time we die, be very, very happy with doing our best and shaving off all the things that didn't belong there. Our senses are faulty to begin with, and we're just going to try our best to work our way through.
Right. They're definitely biased, I would say.
Mm-hmm. But that's where his statement that I thought was so brilliant, this ability to be confused is our power as a rationalist. It really rang true for me.
How would you apply that to, it sounds like we're not getting excited by the outliers in many ways. How would you apply that to professional athletes? Someone like LeBron James, who just seems to be an outlier and, quote unquote freak athlete that just excels in everything he does in the sport of basketball. I guess it would look at it as, okay, this is movement perspective. What are they doing? How are they training? Genetics, all these factors.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see how you relate that mapping and that kind of philosophy to what you do.
Yeah. When I look at humans, my two kind of driving forces that I have behind my vision of them are metabolism and reproduction. I think those are the two most important things to look at. And everything else that you look at outside of that, whether it be a table test, whether it be whatever, they are secondary mechanisms that fall out of your drive to maintain order, which is your metabolism, and your drive to reproduce. and everything else is secondary. So I think once you start to look at it through those lens, then you can say, okay, well, we do have these outliers, but they're not outliers in the sense of life. They're not outliers in the sense of what species tend to do on the planet. They're not outliers in the sense of, sorry, they're
No,
not
you're
outliers in the sense of um, what species do with their lives, and they're not outliers in the sense of humans in general. But when you, after you work your way through all of that, you say, okay, what is different about these players, let's say like a LeBron James, is that maybe they have different femoral relationships with their pelvis. And knowing what I know about physics, which is a very baseline science here, how would that affect maybe what I see on the table? How might that affect when what I see when I videotape them moving? And then those outliers aren't really hard to deal with anymore because they just start to make sense, knowing what you know at the very baseline sciences and knowing what you know about what humans tend to do and how they guard themselves or how they position themselves so that they can acquire nutrition or how they can acquire mates.
Mhm. That's
Um,
go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I like the way you're viewing it, and I haven't thrown in reproduction in there as much. I always look at it from more of a caloric standpoint, what's going to save as many calories, so on and so forth. But I never would have thought about, you see LeBron James move, he does a crazy dunk, something like that, or
Yeah.
and you just break it down to calories and reproduction, and that's
Yeah, I mean, you even go back into the act of sports. Like, why are there sports?
mhm,
There are these massive demonstrations. They're like almost these massive peacockings
right,
in the world, right? And we have outliers, like you said, that do things better in certain athletic endeavors. You have people that eat better body shapes for swimming, better body shapes for pitching the baseball, better body shapes for playing basketball. Like I would never play in the NBA. I'm too short. But those outliers are demonstrating themselves the best way that they can, right? And other people, I'll take myself for example. My way of demonstrating myself is through the sciences, through intelligence, and through my words. Maybe like I describe things more poetically. We have all these different ends of the spectrum, but they're all attempting to achieve the same things.
right,
Is that I want in the future that my lineage goes on, and I need to order myself self as long as possible before I chaotically disorder, um, and so that I can reproduce. And I'm going to do all these things like acquire money. I'm going to acquire a healthy body. I'm going to acquire intelligence so that I can do those things more efficiently.
definitely. I think becoming a trainer in some ways was like a subconscious like selfishness to like maintain
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
better like understanding of and like I don't know, homeostasis or some sort. It's
Yeah.
weird to think of it that way.
But I
um
think if we get down to the root cause of it all, like we're all selfish. I mean, they're very, I think, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and I do believe that there is no such thing as true altruism in humans.
mhm,
I do think that there is a thing called reciprocal altruism, but I don't think that there is this thing called true altruism. And even if we're looking at ourselves, like you do some work in the PT world and the strength and conditioning world, we have these positions that we pattern ourselves in, and we get more patterned up, maybe in a PRI sense, a certain way if we feel unfulfilled in any one of those categories.
mhm.
So if I feel unfulfilled from a nutritional aspect, or I feel unfulfilled sexually, for example, then I might pattern myself up in a certain way that would read out on a table like a left AIC, right BC, right TMCC. If I feel like I have to maybe like over express myself. I might look like a PEC, things of that nature. And I think once you start to look at it that way, those outliers don't seem so kind of rare anymore. They're just exaggerated terms of what is going on with all humans.
Right. Where do you think that genetics fit into this? Do you think that it is my great grandfather was more of an extension based bias? We're getting
Hmm.
super deep in this. Like
Good.
I know some of my like gen pop are gonna listen to this and be like, "What the heck just happened?" But let's get into it. So if I have my way up my lineage, and I have a grandfather that happened to be in more extension based biases, and then they reproduce, and that just became something that was dominant in my lineage, and what happened to work for that person. Do you see where I'm kind of going with this? Like, do you think
Yeah. So
that
you're
happened?
asking a little bit of like, do you think that there are genetically structural kind of like biases that maybe kind of pass themselves on because they were successful um,
Right. And I've read a
to
study too that even talks about how different like levels of muscle tone can
Mhm.
be passed down essentially.
Yeah.
So you can use more spinal erectors over other musculature because your great grandfather did. And I don't know how much I buy it.
So the way that I view this is that it all depends on what type of childhood that person had. And I'm not saying that it's completely epigenetic. What I'm saying is that um, it depends on, is it a single parent household? It depends on, was the kid an orphan? It depends, do they have brothers or sisters? Um, all those things matter. But just generally, if I was to like take a broad stroke brush over all this, what I would say is that the epigenetic type of influences, so that the nature aspect of the nature nurture type of question has less of an influence early on. It has more of an influence in the embryo, it has less of an influence early on in childhood development, and it has more of an influence later in life. So you have different types of influences that have different types of biases to the nature nurture argument at different points of your life. And within the embryo, you're going to have the biggest type of kind of genetic um, kind of component to what you and I are discussing.
Hmm.
However, what happens is that once the child is in its early developmental years, I think the way that it learns to relate to its environment has a very, very big influence and much bigger than the genetic aspect. But you can never separate them. They're always having this communication back and forth, right? But it is biased towards their social circle, their relationship with their parents, their ways of relating to stimuli, their ways of relating to stressors that they learn from their parents and their siblings. And then once they've fully developed physically, and now they're their own independent being that is away from their home life and now has to live their life on their own, now I think you get much more of the genetic influence back end again. So you'll tend to see that in twin studies that when they're separated and they come back together again and such. So you have much more of this genetic influence later in life than you would have earlier.
That's an interesting point. I've always thought, just from my, anecdotal experience, how my home life in high school, and then you go to college, and then after college, at least for me, it just like developed. Like I went from being in college years where I really didn't care about learning new stuff. It was just social interactions. And I think that comes down to also brain development and boys and
Yeah,
males.
yeah.
But after 23 to 26, it's like, boom, all of a sudden I'm go, go, go. I want to learn as much as I can. And there's a huge component there. It's just interesting to
Yeah, but I think that's still too young. Like
really,
what I'm talking about like is in the late 40s, 50s, 60s. Is
really.
that's when I think more of the genetic influence plays into what we're discussing right now. So right now you're still very, like you and I are still very much in this phase where our environment does matter quite a bit,
Mm,
and what we choose to surround ourselves with does matter. And yeah, I agree with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it that way. I think that is a good point, especially with, I listened to it was a podcast and it was a voice coach.
Mm.
And this lady's talking about how, say you have a boy and he has 6 older sisters and he's the youngest of them all. And the sisters put him down. They say, you're dumb, blah, 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 all this stuff. He feels that he needs to now be quiet. So the capability of his voice, he's now soft spoken. It changes how he then interacts with people, potentially even women, and just in general society.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about how this person will come to her at 30 wanting voice training, and she's like, what do you want out of this? And the person's all soft spoken and
Yep.
they cannot express themselves, and it's breaking out of that habit, and it's something that you would never even realize that you're doing. It's just been there for so long. So if that
Yeah,
can
they need to
happen,
learn how to scream.
right, exactly, but if that can happen with someone's voice, why can't it happen with postural positions and how someone uses musculature, or someone who's not even involved in, say, sports, or learns movement capabilities at a younger age? How is that
Yep.
going to affect them and positions that they utilize?
Big time. There are plenty of aspects in which we'll take even the professional athlete through a training cycle, for example, and we'll introduce movements in there that I know that their early development did not allow for them to do properly. So they'll do it with these previous biases that they have. And you just can simply ask them the question, why not do it this way? And or why not think about this movement here? Or let's just stop. What are you doing right now? Things of that nature. You're just asking very simple questions, and oftentimes they come to the conclusion that they're doing it that way just because they don't know any other way.
It's worked in the
That it
past.
is their only answer to that question. And so you offer them maybe another answer, or the ability to scream, for this person that you're talking about. You offer them that answer to the question, and now they can decide for themselves which variable should I insert into my athletic capability or my athletic equation, and who do I want to become now? Now they have more options, and they start to evolve. Like what you're saying is like in your 23, 24, 25, 26, you start to digest all this new information, right? Like you finally get to this point where you say, oh, there are other things that I can learn other than what my college told me,
Right.
or rather than what's in that textbook right there, rather
Mhm.
than the homework.
Right. I think that's like a minor enlightenment. In many ways, it's just the power of choice, and that you have a choice in what you do, what you say, how you
Hmm.
move. I think that's huge. I think movement plays a huge component to it as well. Just having choice and expressing kinesthetically, like, and feeling and sensation, goes a really long way. And I think the brain, this is just me assuming, but I feel like the brain just eats it up.
No, you're right. And the other thing that I found that's very powerful is that if you as a movement coach understand that that is a good option for them, maybe better than the one that they were stuck in, then you have to be very, very excited for them when they choose the right answer,
Mm-hmm.
or the more appropriate answer for the question. And you being excited and them knowing that you are this teacher of movement, um, will want to make them please you more often.
Hmm.
and not necessarily saying like you're this father figure for them, but they want to please you in a sense of they want to move better. They want to continue to move more efficiently. And when they guess right, they're going to be happy about it. There's this study that was done across the NBA, and you can take this in many different ways. But what they did is they looked at how many body contacts the players had amongst themselves, all the way from the lowest ranked team to the highest ranked team. And what they found is that the higher ranking teams had more body contacts amongst themselves. So they had more high fives, more butt slaps, more like chest bumps, that kind of stuff. But you could obviously take that and say, well, they were winning, they had things to cheer about. But you could also take it as a point of, these are guys that will get excited for you making the right decisions as far as teammates go, because they lead to more appropriate answers, which is winning. They're trying to solve the other team, and a way of solving them, there is strategy involved, and decision making matters. Just like when we're talking about human movement, it matters how you go from point A to point B. You can get there any way you want at a low level, but if we're trying to optimize movement, and if we're trying to optimize it at the highest level where those split seconds matter, then there is a right answer. And appreciating them for making that answer, or choosing that answer, it really goes a long way in them choosing it more frequently and more often. So I found that study, it was very interesting, and obviously you take it with a grain of salt, but yeah, body contacts, being happy for each other, cheering each other on, that matters. And having a good training group where you have, for me, I typically have anywhere between 2 and 4 people at a time. Having the right group together matters, because they're going to push each other in the appropriate way and not get down on them like those big sisters of that, like young brother.
Right. I think that's an interesting study, and I'd be curious to see as well the language they use, and because language is one of the easiest ways that we can, if we speak the same, we both have experience in PRI, so we automatically, we're friends pretty much, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So when you have a team like that they're non-verbally communicating the same way, positive, negative, whatever it is, they're more of a cohesive group, correct? So that
Absolutely.
takes me to my next question, which is, I personally think that when we look at, or I'm curious to see people that move in similar ways, if they would also on like a subconscious level have better cohesiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my friends are very good movers. They are very good movers in many different ways as well. And the way that all of us relate to one another, it does matter. There are more body contacts. There is more cheering each other on. There is more support there for failures, and more like, what's the word for it? Empathy,
Mm-hmm.
for circumstances that you may come into, because all of us are better at certain things than other people are. And that's even the power of having the appropriate group, is that you're going to have guys, for example. So I'll give you a good example. We have a pitchers group basically, and one of our guys has one of the nastiest changeups in the major leagues, and one of the other guys has one of the nastiest curveballs, and some of them have amazing fastballs. So what they would do is, every time they're playing catch, is they would talk to each other about how they grip the ball, what they're thinking about. They're wanting each other, even though they're playing on different teams, to become better. And because they know that's a give and take. It's like, I'm going to become a better mover by sharing my information with other movers, because I know that they're going to share their information with me. It's not this just one-way street where I'm taking from them, and I'm going to become the best mover, and, screw them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
So
it's
absolutely.
even at the higher level as well. there's only so many people
Yep.
at that level. And there has to be a community, even if you don't like one person, you're going to probably be closer to the majority of the people within that circle. So like the NBA, I imagine they've all come into contact with every player at some point.
Yep. And
So
the NBA, I think, is one of, as far as like guys getting along, I think the NBA in general is one of the tightest groups that I've come around. Baseball's pretty good, but there's so many of them.
same with
That,
football, I imagine.
yeah, exactly. So I think that basketball, at least from what I've experienced, those guys are kind of the tightest. Doesn't matter what team they're playing on. And obviously you have a few grudges here and there, but for the most part, they all train with each other. They push each other, and it's for the reasons that we're talking about. You have better training competition, you're going to get better.
Definitely. I think too, just how the NCAA with basketball is also set up, and the one and done teams, I think that's may have an influence as well. You have these star players that they play 1 year ball, and for instance, University of Kentucky, Calipari, he unfortunately doesn't care as much about the tournament times, but he wants what's best for his kids, and he wants them to make money, and he wants them to get them into the NBA. Sorry if anyone's listening and doesn't like Calipari, you're just wrong. But maybe because of that same mindset and just, hey, let's get you through and get you to where you're actually making money. Like, this is what you want to do for a living. I think that may have, I'm sure football has that to some degree, but just the vastness of the team, so many
much
people.
Volume. Yeah. Like even on the same team, you have offensive guys that don't necessarily hang out with the defensive guys.
Exactly. And even professional, I look at the Seahawks and half the team will get cut. And when the season starts, that's huge. So you have other folks, and then it would have been, I really wish that XFL would have taken off. That would have been pretty cool. But unfortunately, all this is going on. Well, hey, man, so we've got about like 15 more minutes. I'd love to get into these other questions. We went down a whole nother path that I did not expect.
Sorry.
It's fine. This was awesome. And I've been wanting to talk to someone about the language component and how this relates in nonverbal, verbal, and where it fits. And I think this was awesome. But
okay,
let's get into, so these are kind of like my last three questions I like to ask. I ask everyone, I need to figure out, like, I don't know if I'm going to call them like the tired three, or I got to figure out a cool little name for them. But so you're in a room full of all your Instagram followers. Right?
Okay.
Right. That's a lot of people. Like, and they're there to hear one thing you have to say, and it's your biggest piece of advice. What would you say?
Oh God. I'd say that follow your passion, because it doesn't matter what it is. I think all people kind of reach the same endpoint if you follow your passion to its nth degree. For me, my passion isn't necessarily training. My passion is learning in general. And my learning started very broad because it has to. I mean, we don't have that a very good understanding of the world, and you have to start at your level. You can't start, reading high-end calculus books. You can't start off there. You have to work your way through the process. But what I've noticed is that the more I work my way through, I always end up at the same point. Meaning, like, there's this kind of fun game that you can play on Wikipedia. Is that, how Wikipedia has all these little hyperlinks that you can click on? Like, so you're reading an article, it doesn't matter what the article is about. You click on a hyperlink, and then it takes you to another page. Well, if you keep playing that game, every single time you play it, you end up on philosophy. It doesn't matter how many times you play it, you just keep clicking, and then you're going to end up on philosophy. And I think really that's the whole point of it, is in a sense of we're doing all this work internally on ourselves, and we follow our passion, and we keep clicking on things that interest us. In the very end, we're going to come up with the story that we like to have of the world. And from that story, we do our best to pass it along in the way that we would like to the people that succeed us, whether that be kids, whether that be students, whether that be like our dogs, or it's through things like works of art or writing a book, doing lectures. Those are all ways of passing your philosophy on, but it's because you did all those other clicks that preceded it that allowed you to say, this is my philosophy. So I think you start with a passion and then just keep clicking.
Yeah, I think I've been reading this book called Perennial Seller, I believe.
Okay.
And it's talking about all the great works that are out there. So art, literature, even just Microsoft Word or Office.
Yeah.
These things that are here and they're ingrained into a society, that they just become household names. And it's talking about the true work that goes into that and where it stems from. So, and when you were talking about the writing that you've been doing and how that process has gone on and how long it's taken, it reminded me of that. And now you're talking about this, but it's truly what it's all based in is that you want this to be carried on.
Yes.
And if you just make something that's half-assed, what's the point in the end? Why are you doing that? Is it for a quick buck? Because it's probably not going to do as well as you would hope in the beginning. So that's
absolutely.
It's a very good book. It's
Perennial Seller, you said.
Correct, I believe. Oh, I'm gonna have to look that one up. I'm gonna put that one in the show notes. Let me double check that one.
No, I'm sure it's close enough.
Yeah, Perennial Seller by Ryan Holiday. I'm about halfway through. It's a very interesting book, and he talks about his own personal process as an author and how he goes about it, and how even just having editors and this, you have to have other people's eyes, but also know at your core what you want and what you want that to be. So it has a lot of like philosophy to it as well, and a lot of great quotes. But I think that was a great answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. So let's get into the second one. What do you think about, so you're taking a long car ride, you're driving from LA, say up north or something like that. You're going to Malibu or something. What do you think about? Do you think about like breathing, or you think about exercises, or you think about clients, or are you like diving into more abstract thought process?
Yeah, actually, none of them.
Yeah.
So I read this, and I forget where I read it, but ever since that day, I've done it. What it was is that it was a father talking to his son, and he told his son that if you're not singing on the way to work, then you're doing the wrong thing, or something along those lines. And what I agree that should be something that's ingrained, whether you're singing or not, ingrained within our philosophy. Again, I think it plays off of this whole thing with passion, right? So if you're passionate about where you're going and what you're gonna do, you want to be there at your highest capacity. And not just because you're gonna do a good job, but you want to be there at your highest capacity because there are other people that are reliant on you being at your highest capacity as well. And if you have all these things that are cluttering you in the head, and if you have all these things that you're thinking about, you're not in the present moment, and you're not there to listen to them, you're not there to have a discussion with them, you can't be clear and concise with your answers. So I like to sing I'm not very good, but I like to sing on my way to work. I'll just put on some Jack Johnson, which I know most of the words for those songs. And it's something that's very easy and melodic. And sometimes I'll have my window down, but most of the time I just have my dog on my lap, and we're singing the Jack Johnson. And it puts you in this mood in which you come to work, or you come to where you want to be, where you're going to, and you're calm, and you are fully there because you've had time to release any kind of tension that you've had carried with you. So yeah, I do my work outside of the car. So I'll do my reading and that kind of work, my typing and that kind of stuff when I'm at home or when I'm in a gym like this, for example. But when I'm there, I'm there, and when I'm not there, I'm not there. You know, I'm in my car and hanging and having a good time, and that way it prevents some road rage and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with something similar, and it's just because I'm always trying to. We think we're optimizing when we're multitasking, and we
Hmm.
think we're getting the most out of all of the time that we have here, because that's really the most precious resource we have. So I'll sit there and I'll listen to a book on Audible, I'll listen to a podcast.
Yep.
And more recently I've gone back to just silence, like just roll the windows down and just relax and focus on driving or just listening to music again.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and at first I felt guilty almost, because I'm not taking full advantage of it, but it's really that experience of just being there. It's almost like meditation.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's value in both, right?
Mhm.
I think there is value in listening to a podcast or listening to a book. I think there is value in doing what we're talking about here, whether it's in silence or you're singing. Um, but the value comes in you being all the way in there. And if you are driving and listening to this and you're doing it in an urgent manner because you feel like you don't have enough time on the planet, and you have to learn it all now, then you're not making fun of the learning. You're not allowing the learning to come to you. You're trying to chase it always.
Mhm.
And so I think there's value in that as well, but it cannot be done in an urgent manner.
Right. I Again, another book I read. It's Influence by, I cannot remember his name. I'm always horrible with the book names.
I'm bad with that too. I'll
Yeah.
remember all the titles, but I never remember the authors.
Right. His name is Robert something. Cialdini. Robert Cialdini.
Okay.
And he talks
It's called
about,
Influence, do you say?
correct. And I read it I was like, oh, I would need to learn how to sell training better. But in reality, it was way deeper than I had expected. And it got into like the psychology of making decisions. And one of the things is advertisers will do is they'll create scarcity with products in competition, in order to make us not think clearly
Yeah.
and make impulse decisions. And
Yep.
that's exactly where I'm going, is if you're thinking of time as scarcity and you're thinking that you have to jam it full of everything, you're not going to be making sense of whatever information is there at that
Yeah.
point in time. And
You're leaving no time to live too. Yeah.
exactly. So it's interesting. It's been nice. Some days I have like a 45-minute commute, and
Okay.
I'll just be there. Some days I'm like, I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to listen to this stuff. But it's taking away, I guess, the guilt piece that I used to have on myself for not smashing as much information into one day as possible. It's more just being there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, man. What do you think, or here, let's get to the next question. What is the worst advice you've ever gotten
Worst
or
advice I've ever
received?
got. Oh, I don't know if I've ever had bad advice. Other than I'll say it this way. The bad advice that I've received has come with no qualifications about why. Meaning, like, it's not necessarily bad in what they're saying. They could be saying something very appropriate and very um, necessary for me to digest. However, if the information never comes with prerequisites or qualifiers or the whys, that's when I feel like the advice is inappropriate. Um, and that's become less and less as I've gotten older, because what I've realized is that sometimes they'll give you this piece of information and they'll just say it at you, like, don't squat below 90, for example, right? Or something along those lines. Then it's up to you, if it's important to you, to do the work on your own. So by having an approach like that, almost all information seems to be okay to hear, and then you have to decide what to do with that. However, like there's a way to qualify how much density of information a statement has. And sometimes I feel like the worst advice is the one that doesn't contain very much information out there. Like, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of political type of environment right now, and a lot of people will say these things that are phrases, but they don't necessarily understand what the phrases mean, or they get said so often that they lose the density of that information, because it just hits them in the face so often that they just stop listening to it. However, the best advice seems to be the ones that are said less frequently, with more impact, and with the information necessary to go on your own to the next levels to discover more about that statement. So it's a hard question, because I don't necessarily, I can't come up with anything off the top of my head about bad information that I've received, or advice, sorry. But that's how I would qualify it, is that, saying the things that I just did right there.
Right. Looking at it from advice given without explanation.
Yeah, and you have to decide, maybe those types of people that just keep giving advice that they don't have a whole lot of prerequisites or qualifications behind the statement that they're saying, or they're never going to give you more than the superficial, whether those people are worth keeping around you or not. You want the people that will sit there and take time with you if you want to learn more about that subject matter. And then you, as a listener, have to be ready to reciprocate as well, right? Like, you have to ask questions that require them to give complex answers. And then you have to reciprocate in a way that, if they want to ask you questions about your area of expertise, you're going to give that same type of effort back towards them.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the other types of relationships that you have in your life that are just superficial, the whole, like, give you like a how are you and not really care about the answer in return, those are worth letting go.
Right. I heard, I can't remember the resource, but it was speaking of similar things where you speak with almost elevator pitches.
Yeah.
Instead. So it's, how can I be as direct as possible, but also lengthen out just a quick phrase of, hey, how are you? And then continue with some other sort of way to instill true, like, just get out more from the conversation and more from what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think it's been something I've been trying for a while. It's tough.
It is very difficult.
It's reaction. It's what we've done for so long. Just, hey, even when we got on the call, I was like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Like, and it was the most superficial thing.
Yeah, but it is even harder nowadays as well, because we have all these distractions around us, like phones and like all this information that's blasting us from 10 different directions, and we must understand okay, it comes time when I have a personal relationship with somebody right now and I'm having a conversation with them. How do I eliminate those other 9 foci and just lock in on this conversation here?
Right.
And so that's very important as a listener, as a digester of information, but also as a person that's trying to convey information too.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Fantastic answer. Well,
Thank you.
Matt, it has been fantastic having you on the show. Where can we find out more about you, man?
Just
If you'd
my
like to be
Instagram.
found. Okay.
Yeah, the Instagram is the only thing I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not very good on it, but it is there if people want it. And I do try my best to answer things.
Gotcha. Yep. Do you have any training that you do online or anything of those sorts? No. You
No, I don't.
gotta
Yeah,
find you in person.
yeah, I'm
People want
just here
services.
with this one right here. That's all.
Oh man. I'm gonna make
This
this
is
the Instagram picture right there.
exactly. This is Lulu.
Oh, Lulu. I always
So she
try.
hangs out with me the whole time we train, and yeah, that it's all in person, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. Hey, it's what works, and that's what you do, man. Well, awesome. Well, it was great to have you and Lulu on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, we'll have to do this again sometime, and we'll go ahead and stop the recording there.
Thank you, Kyle.